Hey there, island dreamers, locals, and anyone craving a slice of paradise. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the Fun in Key West podcast, where the vibe is always laid back, the stories are salty, and the drinks, well, they're definitely frozen. I'm your host, Michelle O'Connor, your unofficial tour guide to the Conquered Public. Whether you're planning your first trip, your fifth trip, or you're just daydreaming about trading the cubicle for the ocean breeze, you are in the right place. Here's the deal. This podcast is your insider's guide to all things Key West. We're talking where to eat, hello, conch fritters and key lime pie, where to drink, spoiler alert, there will be rum, where to stay, and all the quirky, wonderful things that make Key West the one-of-a-kind paradise we all love. Plus, we'll keep you up to date on the latest happenings, festivals, events, maybe even the occasional Hemingway lookalike sighting. And just to keep things spicy, we'll be bringing on some amazing guests now and then, locals, business owners, and people who know the island like the back of their sandy hand. So grab your flip-flops, pour yourself a cold one, and let's escape to the island state of mind together, whether you're tuning in from your hammock or your commute, while wishing it was a hammock. We've got all the Key West goodness coming your way. Thanks for being here. It's going to be a lot of fun in Key West. Let's dive in. Welcome. I am so glad that you're here because today's episode is going to go into so many different directions. And honestly, that's what makes it fun. We've got a returning guest back on the show, David Sloan. And if you know David, you already know that this is going to get interesting. He's a Key West author, storyteller, researcher, artist, key lime pie expert, haunted Key West expert, and Robert the Doll expert. Basically, if there's a strange, fascinating, or slightly spooky story hiding somewhere on Key West, David has probably already gone down that rabbit hole. Now, David first joined us way back on episode 6. So if you want to get the full backstory, how he got to Key West and how he became, David Sloan, go give that one a listen. But today we're catching up on what he's been up to since then. And let me tell you, there is plenty to talk about. And before we dive in, this episode is brought to you by Eyewitness Crime Tours, which is a pretty perfect fit if we're being honest. If you love the darker, stranger side of Key West history, this tour takes you well beyond the postcard version of the island and into the real crimes, mysteries, and unforgettable characters that help shape it. You can learn more over at FunInKeyWest.com/crime-tour.
Welcome to Fun in Key West, where every day feels like a mini fest. Grab a drink, take it slow. We'll show you where the locals go. Food, fun, and stories to tell. Hidden gems you know so well. Your Key West experts here to say it's fun in Key West every day.
Welcome to the Fun in Key West podcast. I am so glad that you are here, and I am so excited because today we have a returning guest, and it's one of those conversations that I don't know where it's going to go, but it could go in probably 27 different ways, which is going to make this that much more fun. So David Sloan is back on the podcast. He is an author, storyteller, researcher, artist, key lime pie expert, haunted Key West expert, Robert the Doll expert, and one of those people who can take a Key West story and suddenly take you down a very long rabbit hole. David was actually on one of our earlier episodes, so be sure to check out episode number 6. And in that episode, we talked about more about his background, how he ended up in Key West, and all that stuff that you want to know. So be sure to check out episode number 6. So today we're going to figure out what has David been up to since then. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Yeah.
What episode number is this? What are we up to now?
This is, I think, episode number 162, 161.
Yeah.
And
busy.
so, yeah, it's pretty fun. And so at this point in time, before we jump in, This episode is brought to you by the Eyewitness Crime Tour, which I think is absolutely fitting. If you love the darker, stranger, true crime side of Key West history, this is absolutely one to check out. Eyewitness Crime Tours takes you beyond the postcard version of Key West and into the real stories, mysteries, and unforgettable characters that help shape the island of Key West. You can learn more at FunInKeyWest.com/crime-tour. So let's dive in.
And
So,
Kim and Yvonne, I just gotta say, Kim and Yvonne, who are leading those tours, they are amazing. So good stuff.
that is such a fun.
Look, even my dog's excited about it.
You're going to probably hear mine in the background too. Mr. Coffee loves to make an appearance whenever I don't need him to make an appearance. But yeah, Kim does a fantastic job on that tour. And if you think you have heard every story about Key West, take the tour because you're going to learn
Yep.
more.
Yep.
So for our listeners, David, that don't know you, which I find probably very surprising, but for those of us that may not have a full background and didn't get a chance to listen to episode number 6, give us a little bit of background of who you are and how did you end up in Key West?
So I was born in Pennsylvania, grew up in Texas, college in Miami, and that I was in the hospitality industry. So when I graduated, I managed cruise ships for several years, and I saw a ghost tour in Scotland. And I had been into ghosts since I was in kindergarten. And so when I saw that, of course I went on it, but then there weren't really ghost tours in the United States yet. And I was looking at how many people they had going on the tours. And I said, wow, these people are making a living telling ghost stories. So I quit my job and I moved to Key West. And the rest is history. And it's been, let's see here, May 1st marked 30 years in Key West.
Wow. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for someone who's brand new to you, how do you describe what you do? Because I think author feels a little small and limiting.
Yeah. It's really hard to say what I do. I mean, right now I'm kind of going with entertainment producer because I like entertaining people.
Mm-hmm.
I love history. I love researching. I love all of that. But, the historian's a little dry and that doesn't really fit I'm more of a my historian because, I like interpreting history. I like digging through and really putting things back together or reverse engineering stories. So I've got a real passion for everything Key West and the Florida Keys. So, and whatever it is that makes these islands so special, I like kind of grabbing that and really doing a deep dive.
So do you feel like you're preserving Key West history or chasing Key West legends or a little bit of both?
Probably a little bit of both. I don't know how much. I don't know how much we really preserve. You look at history and you ask people who invented penicillin, and a lot of people I don't know. So a lot of important things happen, and I think everybody wants to have some kind of a legacy. But I feel like I don't feel like all this has been my choice. I feel like I was led to Key West. I mean, I show up and I try to pay attention, and then I ended up here. And what was really cool, I mean, I've been here 30 years. It took almost 20 years until I realized that my great 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 grandfather's Civil War regiment was in charge of Key West during the Civil War. We were part of the Union. He was in the Pennsylvania 47th Volunteers, and they actually built the fort where Robert the Doll is, and where I spent a lot of my time working and researching. So I really do feel like I was guided in that sense.
That is so cool. Which brings us to this month's Fun in Key West Book Club choice, which is How Key West Killed JFK. And I have to tell you that's a title that just jumps out at you and says, "Okay, grab hold of me. Let's read more." So, give us a little bit of background on why you wrote the book.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting, and a lot of people they look at the book title and they say, "Oh, is this like a joke?" And I'll say, "No, but that's what I thought too," because I was looking for Bum Farto. The and for those who don't know who Bum Farto is, he was the Key West fire chief in the 1970s, actually from 1964 up until
Mhm.
76. And he was convicted of selling cocaine and marijuana from the firehouse. And he's pretty much the Jimmy Hoffa of Key West. And it's been 50 years now since he disappeared. And me and a friend decided, hey, let's find where he is. And a friend of mine had sent me the FBI files. They had done a FOIA request. And it was a game changer because it took it from just locals saying, hey, I know what happened. I know where he is. Because some people said, he was killed by the Colombians. No, the Tampa Mafia took him out.
Right.
Oh, he escaped to Costa Rica. The FBI files shed a lot of light on things that nobody had ever seen.
Hmm.
And so we took those FBI files and we followed the trail. And we ended up finding out where he went and pretty much what happened to
Hmm.
him. So, in the course of that, when we were doing that, a lot of the documents um, with these people were showing up in the JFK assassination files. Because they had a lot, the CIA was focusing a lot on what was going on in South Florida.
Mhm.
There's a huge CIA base um, in Miami, the Cuban exiles all throughout the Florida Keys. And I came across a document that said Jack Ruby was selling guns from an Isla Mirada motel room.
Wow.
And there were multiple witnesses who told the investigators the same story. And I looked at that and I said, damn, I've never heard that story. And then I come across one that says Lee Harvey Oswald fueled up his boat in Marathon and then refueled again at Safe Harbor in Stock Island.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, what? What's he doing with that? And then there's another report. The mayor, Kermit Lewin, said that he saw Lee Harvey Oswald at his hotel. And then the one that clinched it for me, there was a report that the director of the airport, George Faraldo, saw Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby together in the Key West airport, and that they were waiting for a flight from the Fair Play for Cuba committee.
Wow.
And this report, George Faraldo said that he had taken photographs of them, and he had sent some to a news station, because he was a stringer. He'd provide different information, and then he was supposed to have a copy himself. Now, George had passed away, but his wife Norma was still alive, and I called Norma and I said, "Do you know what the CIA is saying about George?" And she said, "Oh yeah, it's all true."
Oh. Wow.
And I asked her about the photo. She said, I think I still have it somewhere. She said, I'd have to dig for it. And, I'm not feeling real well right now. Uh, we never got the chance to get together. She passed away
Hmm.
before we had that chance. But it's interesting. I mean, that's what clinched it for me.
Mhm.
When I heard her voice saying, oh, yeah, it's all true, I had no doubt that this is something that had happened. And so I kind of put the Bumfardo stuff on hold
Mhm.
and did the deep into the Kennedy assassination. And I was raised in Dallas,
Right.
about 15-minute drive from where the assassination took place. But so I grew up around it, but it was never a huge passion of mine. I didn't think I'd be doing the deep dive into it.
Right.
But when I heard that, I said, "Oh, I got to find this out." And then I discovered that no matter what theory you subscribe to about who
Mhm.
assassinated Kennedy, that person is going to have a direct tie to Key West or the Florida Keys. So,
So that's interesting. So why is the location of Key West so crucial during this time period? What
a
role
lot
did
of
it play?
what was happening, there was the Cold War stuff going on, and you had a lot of people who didn't like Kennedy. He was trying to dismantle the CIA. They had a huge base in Miami, right at the gateway to the Keys, where they had several hundred agents, and they had Cuban exiles, thousands of Cuban exiles on the payroll. And with the tensions that were going on with Cuba, Castro came in, he took over, and when he took over, he had a lot of Cuban exiles coming up through the Florida Keys.
Right.
Um, the Tampa Mafia, well, all the mafia, they
Yeah.
had their casinos in Cuba and it was extremely lucrative. And so when Castro came in, they lost a lot of funding and they were scrambling to make up for that revenue. And the Tampa Mafia already had a stronghold in Key West. They had had the Bolita numbers, which was a form of numbers gambling, and they had had that for a long time. They had been around since before Prohibition, because the Keys were such a great gateway to all of the United States. So Traficante had heroin coming in through here. Then they took over the Bolita rackets, and they were involved in almost every aspect of Key West. And what blows me away, Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters,
Mhm.
they owned about a third of the island. The Teamsters Fund would purchase these different properties. They invested in the La Concha Hotel, the Casa Marina Hotel, and then most of what is considered Newtown now.
Mhm.
Um, and and so and I keep uncovering more documents. I mean, some that isn't in the book. Garrison Bight Marina,
Mhm.
they were moving to take over all of that.
Wow.
There's elements of the Chicago Mafia, or people who were adjacent to them, who were running most of the island, the airport property, the old Holiday Inn property up at the
Mhm.
other end of the island.
Right.
So the mafia had this big stronghold. And then with Kennedy, when the Bay of Pigs invasion took place, you know, he called off the air support
Mhm.
and it turned into a disaster. So you had Castro, who hated him for trying to attack, the Cuban exiles who felt betrayed, so they hated him, and then the mafia. They had helped get him elected. Uh, you
Mhm.
know, through and then he set his brother against them. And he made them public enemy number one. So all of the people operating from Miami down to Key West, they all wanted him dead.
Wow.
And so it makes Key West a major player
Mhm.
in the national and international stage. So
So I grew up with a dad who subscribed to a lot of the conspiracy theories around the Kennedy assassination. I had a chance to do a report in front of class in elementary school. And of course, I had to present one of my dad's theories. It didn't go over real well because it wasn't a popular theory. But how did you approach this? And there's some disclaimers in the book of how you approach this to say we're not validating or not valid, or saying that these other ideas aren't true, but this is the facts that we found. How did you approach that? Because there's so many conversations about this.
it's interesting because I didn't want to write a conspiracy theory book. I didn't want to say, hey, here's how Kennedy was killed.
Mhm.
I wanted to tell the story of Key West and the incredible role, because even after 30 years in Key West, I didn't hear anybody talking about these
No.
connections.
Mm-mm.
And my goal was to write a good beach read, a book somebody could grab at their hotel and lay by the pool and read it and say, wow, that's crazy about Key West. So I didn't want to get into, who is shooting from where in Dealey Plaza, because there's already thousands of people doing that.
Mhm.
And I find all of those conspiracy books, or the ones that claim to prove a conspiracy, they've got so many names and so many directions, and you look at it and you're like, what? So my
It's like
goal
a
was to avoid yeah. So my goal was to avoid that, and I just wanted the good story. But then, God, I was about a month from publishing, and there's a guy named Gilberto Policarpo Lopez,
Mhm.
and he was a baker in Key West. He had come from Cuba. His mom was from Key West. His dad was from Cuba, and he came over from Cuba in 1960, and he was a baker right here in Key West at Molina Bakery. And he is a suspect in the assassination. And when you go through these files, and there's about 6 million pages in the JFK assassination files,
Mhm.
but Gilberto Lopez is a suspect because the evening of the assassination, the night of,
Mhm.
he crossed the border from Texas into Mexico. The Mexican authorities flagged him as a suspect in the assassination, as someone who was involved. The CIA, the FBI, they withheld information from the Warren Commission. They downplayed his importance. They didn't pursue him until he had already boarded a plane to Cuba as the only passenger with a crew of 9. And when he went over there, the last report was a few months later about him, being unemployed and playing dominoes, and he hadn't paid back somebody from the Fair Play for Cuba committee.
Right.
And here's something interesting, okay?
Yeah.
So there's all that going on with him. But then the number of parallels between Gilberto Lopez and Lee Harvey Oswald, a lot of people say they look very similar. Um, they, they both came over from communist countries at about the same time. They both had physical fights in public over Fidel Castro. They both were members of the Fair Play for Cuba committee. They both left their wives shortly before the assassination. There's other researchers listed all these parallels. Okay, so it's not like I came up with them and said, there's this, this, and this. But you start looking at them and you're like, oh, this guy seems like he's involved. And there was enough evidence, and I looked at his age and I thought, oh, he might be alive. And so I figured I'd go to Cuba and try to track him down. There was an address in the CIA files, and I'm like, oh, I think I can do this. And I called my friend Cheryl Sanchez Simmons, who's a brilliant researcher, and hey, I'm going to go to Cuba and try to find this guy. Can you put me in contact with some people there? Maybe help me out. And she said, yeah, give me a little bit of time. And she came back to me and said, hey, you're not going to have to go there. I found him. He returned to the United States.
Wow.
And when a suspect in the Kennedy assassination returns to the United States and is not investigated, the fact that all the other researchers wrote about him never found him there, I mean, it was curious. He had moved back to Hialeah. He was in the heart of the Cuban exile community. He had passed away in 2021, but I found that he had a daughter. And so I sent her an email, and I told her what I was doing, and I wouldn't expect someone to want to respond. When you say, hey, I believe your dad might have killed the president. Would you like to talk? But she responded and she said, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I said, well, I'm a writer in Key West, and I love Key West. And so I'm covering that aspect. And she opened up to me. It turns out that her husband's family is from Key West. And we emailed for a while, and then we texted, and then we started talking. And she shared 60 years of missing history.
Wow.
She talked about her father. She talked about his abuse. She talked about his hardcore communism. She confirmed that he was in Dallas the day that Kennedy was assassinated. He had told her this. He never said that he was, that he pulled the trigger.
Right.
He said he had attended communist meetings there that day. There was just a lot of information that she shared, and it's a real game changer. And the other cool thing, I was able to find a photograph of him. The only photo that existed of him before this, he was wearing dark sunglasses. He was photographed at night in Mexico City wearing dark sunglasses by the agents there. Pardon me. So nobody knew what he looked like. I was able to unearth his passport photo. So for the first time, people can see what he looks like. And then through his daughter, I was able to get pictures of him throughout the years, from the time she was born, even before that, up until he was an old man. And what I think with those photos, do I think that he was involved in the assassination? Yes. Does his daughter think so? Yes. Can I prove more than what's there? Not necessarily, but I think what's going to happen now with those photos out there, I think the people who devote their lives to researching the assassination are going to know where some photos are, and they're going to look, they're going to be like, that's who that is. Because there are still unidentified people in the crowd. So the book went from an interesting beach read to pretty much probably some of the most important evidence in the assassination to come out in decades.
Yeah. So, what do you think the readers are going to be most surprised to learn when they dive into this book?
I think everything about the mafia in Key West. I mean, nobody talks about that,
Mm-mm.
and I think you know people couldn't really say no to organized crime, and a lot of people who were adjacent to the Tampa Mafia didn't even know that they were doing that. You had the Bolita tickets, and every corner store sold them. Policemen were playing the game. You had all these people going around town saying, "Oh, how'd you do on your numbers? What are your lucky numbers?" And it was a part of the culture of Key West. But all that money was going up to bankers, and those bankers were directly tied to Santo Traficante and Tampa. So there was big money going to him. And then Fidel Castro was involved too,
Mhm.
because the numbers were based on the Cuban lottery. So he had secret agents all over Key West and South Florida. So they'd get paid by knowing the numbers before they were drawn. And so they'd just buy a Bolita ticket and collect that way. But the the cat and mouse games that were going on throughout the Florida Keys, safe houses on almost every key, huge shipments of guns traveling up and down the Keys. These exiles, they were practicing in people's backyards. They'd go up in their little rubber rafts, and they'd simulate attacks, and then they were going over and they were trying to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Right.
So it's just unbelievable history. And so I think a lot of people, some people lived through this, and they read it and they're like, yeah, I mean, that's just amazing, what was going on. But I think people who weren't around at that time and don't even know the grand picture, you know, uh, I mean, Key West, people thought they were going to die. There were missiles pointed at us during
Hmm.
the Cuban Missile Crisis. They'd have the duck and cover drills. The La Concha Hotel was a fallout shelter. People really thought that there was a risk of death. Um, it's funny. Last night on the news, they were talking about how there was a rumor that Cuba has drones and that they were going to attack Guantanamo and Key West
Right.
if the U.S. aggression continued. And then Cuba's going back and saying, no, 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 that's U.S. propaganda. But it's the same thing. It's the same tensions that were
Mhm.
happening during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so history right now is very much repeating itself. And there's a lot we can learn from the past.
Absolutely. And what I took away from the book and what I'm taking away from this conversation is the documents released under the Warren Commission didn't actually tell the whole story. So, under the Freedom of Information Act, more documents were then released that helped you create the story. So, it wasn't just the Warren Commission, but it was a combination of a lot of different documents
Mhm.
that collaborated what you found, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the Kennedy assassination files, like I said, there's like 6 million pages,
Yeah.
and a lot of that was just released in the last decade.
Mhm.
So, and even less time than that. So when these new things came out, and one of the great recent things that happened was a lot of the files that had already been released were released unredacted,
Right.
and there were documents where Gilberto Lopez's name had been redacted. And now to see those documents come to light, and showing the address where he was living in Key West, and just these little clues. And I subscribe to one of the sites where you can actually search all of the documents, and so putting in different keywords for Key West and for the Florida Keys, and every key up and down.
Right.
Instead of going on social media every night, I'd be up for hours just going through, and I'd uncover these documents, and I'd look at them, I'd say, "Oh my God, uh, unbelievable!" And I expect that, I think there's still more to
Mhm.
come. It's really incredible stuff.
You mentioned places, and in the book references back to the Teamsters and the Mafia and Jimmy Hoffa and all of that. There are actual places in Key West that were tied up with all of that, the fraud and the schemes that were part of the Teamster Union back then, wasn't there?
Yeah, yeah, and Sam Hyman was, he was the guy with the Florida Keys Foundation, and he was convicted right along with Hoffa.
Hmm.
and I don't think he served much jail time. He was an older man at the time, but yeah, he was part of it.
Yeah.
And then when Jimmy Hoffa went missing, people were saying that he was in Key West. One of my favorite stories, they said that he was buried in the cistern underneath the Casa Marina Hotel. And that's the story I'd always heard. And then
Right.
when I found out that he had ownership in the Casa Marina Hotel, I thought, oh, well, that makes a little more sense now.
It's not so
And
random, right?
and there were some people when the hotel was still closed. There were some people out on the beach there, and they saw some men with clipboards and who were dressed like they're not from Key West,
Right.
and they were standing outside of the entrance to the cistern, and then they saw two divers come out, and one of the people looked at the other. They said, they found Hoffa. But they were either inspecting the cistern or there really was a search there. There was a guy who led a big film crew. One of the major TV networks came down because he said, "I know where Hoffa is, and he's buried just off the coast of Key West."
Right.
So interesting stuff.
Interesting stuff. So, what conversations do you hope that this book prompts?
I just hope that someone can find photos of Gilberto Lopez. I mean, I think anybody who reads this, people love it. People love talking about it. It's probably my best-selling book to date. Um, you know, because it has all those elements. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, ultimately, whatever people want to talk about, that's good for them. I
Yeah.
just love sharing what I'm passionate about, and I really hope that it ends up solving things, or proving that the conspiracy existed. I think anybody who goes through all the documents will look at them and say, "Oh God, yeah, yeah, definitely a lot of people involved."
Yeah. Absolutely. We're going to take a real brief pause here to let people who are in the chat have an opportunity to ask any questions and say hi. Let me just check out the chat. I try not to get too distracted about watching that. We have somebody saying hi. Thank you for listening and watching. Um, Sandy says she enjoyed the book. So
Thank
that,
you, Sandy.
yeah. And so as we start to move forward, and you brought up a really good point, and this is going to transition us into, you have written so many books at this point, and we talked about this a little bit earlier before we came on. How many books are we up to now?
Somewhere between 25 and 30.
25 and 30. And you're saying that this one right now is one of your best sellers, but of all the books you've written, which one still seems to be the most popular?
The ghost ones do great. Like
Yeah.
Haunted Key West sells all the time. Quit your job and move to Key West. That still sells incredibly well. And it's funny because the last update we did on that was, I don't know, a long time ago. So a lot of that information's outdated, but people still love it because, it's the dream.
Uh-huh.
And what I love is that I still meet people. I'll meet a dozen people in a month who say, I read your book and I did it. So that's pretty cool.
That is cool.
And it's exciting because my wife's in real estate, so she's with Berkshire Hathaway. So now I tell her, I'm like, you're doing it right. Instead of making $5 a book, I should have been I should have been getting selling people the houses. But now, but it's great. So my wife and I, we're starting Sloan's Key West, which is going to be more of a Key West lifestyle because we have the bucket list books and
Mhm.
people who are planning a trip here absolutely love them
Yeah.
because it shows them the unique adventures and it's not paid advertising. It's things that I love from 30 years of being here.
Right.
And a lot of the people in the book don't even, well, I don't tell them that I'm putting them in there. Uh, and it's cool because it gives people the authentic experience. So, we'll start doing more. Our plan for this coming year is to go do all 100 things in the Key West book, all 100 things in the Florida Keys book.
That's
So that'll be fun, and we'll share that online with people. And Um,
Yeah, I've
good stuff.
met people who, when the new edition of the bucket list comes out, they quickly run out and see if they've either moved up or down or are in the book. Because, like you said, it's not sponsored; it's what you love, and it's
Yep.
that golden seal of approval if David Sloan says yes. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. Is there a book that locals respond to differently than visitors?
Hmm. I think a lot of locals love Tutu the Almost Hemingway Cat.
Yeah, I like that one.
Because for tourists, like the Hemingway cats are just like, oh, you got to see the Hemingway cats. But
Mhm.
I think locals have much more of an appreciation and they really feel like the cats are part of their family.
Right,
And with Tutu the Almost Hemingway Cat, it's a storybook.
right.
And and there was an actual Tutu. I lived across the street from the Hemingway house on Olivia Street.
Mhm.
And that cat came with the house when I rented it. And I've had so many houses in Key West where it's like, yes, you can rent it, but you've got to take the cat.
You're right.
So they had the fences up to keep the cats inside the Hemingway house. And Tutu used to go over and sit on the wall. And the tourists would come by and they'd see the sign saying Hemingway House and they'd say, oh, look, it's a Hemingway cat.
Oh,
And Tutu got so much attention. And they called her Tutu because her fur stuck out like a tutu, and
right.
she had been rescued from a bait bucket in Stock Island.
Mhm.
So she had this incredible journey, and I just sat down one day, and it was channeled to me, and I wrote the story. And
That's
then David Laughlin, who's he was a longtime Key West incredible artist, and he did the illustrations, and it came together as this really cool book.
it is a cool book. It really is
Yeah.
a book. Which one of your books feels the most personal to you?
I'd say the Key Lime uh, history book.
Okay.
Like with the key lime, I don't even know how it happened. I did a key lime cookbook because I used to be a baker. I'd made key lime pie, and I was really fascinated by the legend of Aunt Sally and wanted to find out who she was. And then it became part of my life. Along with Marky Pearson, we launched the Key Lime Festival,
Mhm.
and Nadine and We've Got the Keys. They run that now, and the festival's gone beyond my wildest dreams. But there was the controversy between there was a chef who had said that key lime pie was created in New York,
Mm. Mhm.
and so it became a thing in the media, and it became like who can prove where it came from. So I spent a lot of time proving that key lime pie is from Key West, and I mean it's ridiculous to think you'd even have to do that, but it was fun. I mean, she's I like the chef who was saying that,
Right.
but so it was the fun back and forth. But with all the media there, I felt the pressure to really say, no, don't worry, Key West, I've got your back.
Right.
I'm going to prove without a shadow of a doubt that it's right here from our island.
There you
So so that's the most personal to me, just um, because I felt like I was, sticking up for the island.
defending the fact that key lime pie is from Key West.
Yes,
Sandy says that she gives the bucket list book to anybody coming for the first time and they love it. So that's a
excellent. Thank you,
great book.
Sandy.
That is a great book to recommend for people on the first one. What's if somebody's new to you and hasn't read any of your books, what book would you suggest they read first to start their journey down the path of all your books?
So much of it depends on the person. Like when I'm talking to them, where they're from.
Mm.
How much time are they spending here? So there's a lot of things to figure out what's best for them. If someone's moving here, I tell them the Key West trivia book,
Oh yeah.
um, because that one is like a crash course in knowing everything that a local should know.
Yep.
So if you read that and you get that familiarity, then you can have fascinating conversations anywhere you go. If you're sitting in
Yeah.
a bar, you can start dropping dropping knowledge on people. So that's good, and it lets people know the
Mhm.
depth of the island.
Yes.
That there is so much more. I mean, the bars are great. God knows I patronized them for decades, but but there's so much more behind Duval Street, behind snorkeling at the reef, behind the bars,
Yep.
behind the great food scene.
Yep.
And so this really covers all those areas. And
Yeah, I think
so that's, yeah.
and what's really cool is if you are signed up on the Fun in Key West newsletter, every week I send out a trivia question. And if you get it right, you get to go in a drawing to win some really fun stuff at the end of the month. I put together a Fun Key West box. So, shameless plug. If you're not on
That's so
newsletter,
cool. No, I
get
love
on our
to hear
newsletter.
that.
Yeah. So that leads me then to what are you doing today? I see that you have two new books out on the horizon. Let's start with the first one. And you
Yep.
alluded a little bit to it earlier. Where
Mhm.
is Bum Farto? This one was put on hold so that you could work on how Key West killed JFK. So tell us about, you gave us a little bit of background on who he was. Why has the story lasted so long in Key West?
I think it just has all the elements. You talk. And it's funny because when anybody talks about him, they say, he was the flamboyant fire chief, convicted of trafficking cocaine from the fire station. He dressed all in red. He wore smoked a cigar, wore outlandish jewelry, had the rose-colored glasses. So, but what I found, you know, people really just make him a caricature.
Mm-hmm.
And behind that, and I tried to do this in the JFK book as well. I don't think anybody's a villain
Mm.
or a hero.
Okay.
I mean, we're all human, and I think every human out there is doing the best that they can with what they have at that point in time. So I try to keep that human element. And what I found with Bumfardo, um, you know, doing Where is Bumfardo would lose the whole point. And I think to understand where he
Right.
went, people first need to understand who he was. So I split the book into two. And the one that I'm doing right now, and I'm wrapping it up, it's Who is Bumfardo? And it covers from the time he was born up until the moment that he disappeared from Key West. And I think that story is even more intriguing than where he went, because there's things that nobody ever knew, and almost everything they know about him is wrong.
Right.
I don't believe that he was selling cocaine. I mean, he was convicted, but if you looked at that case today, then it was pure entrapment. They went to the station. They had the undercover officer, and he said, "Hey, can you get me some cocaine?" And he said, "No, I can't do that." And he said, "How about if I give you this gold ring?" And he has this gold diamond ring. So he knew in advance that Bumfardo was obsessed with jewelry. And I have the memos from Bumfardo's files where he's ordering different jewelry, and he's sending letters saying, "I'm still waiting on my ring. Where's my ring? Where's my ring?" So this obsession wasn't a secret. And why would an undercover officer go in with a ring ready to convince him like that?
Exactly.
So, and then later on, so the marijuana shows up because after 3 weeks, he still couldn't find him any cocaine. And so he says, "Here's a little bit of pot, just as a goodwill gesture. Hold the ring for me for a little bit longer."
Hmm.
And then he finally got the cocaine. So he gets 3 charges: two of delivery, and two of delivery of cocaine, one of delivery of marijuana. But I don't know of any cocaine dealer who takes a month to get somebody cocaine. So, and now I'm not saying he was innocent. He was involved in a much bigger system.
Right.
But all of my research points to him being a powerful person in control of fire in the town.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tampa Mafia used fire as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that could burn people out. It was something that was a distraction, where everybody in town would run to that distraction when other things were happening on another side of town.
Right.
And I believe that he stepped into that position, and they probably had some things on him. And it's like, hey, you can either say yes or you can die.
Yep.
So there's that, and him wearing red and being a flamboyant dresser. He did that because Santa Rita, he honored Shango and Santa Barbara. And, they were the ones who protect firefighters. And, and, and the rose colored glasses.
Oh,
I can't give too much away.
don't give it all away. So when does that one come out?
That's a good question. It was supposed to be out May 1st.
Okay.
But at the last minute, I uncovered so much new information. So I added 6 chapters.
Wow.
And 4 of those are written. I've got a couple more to do. But then I'm going to go back and do the rewrite with all of the new information. So my goal is to have it out in June. So the pre-order should ship in June.
Oh, awesome. Yes.
But if that doesn't happen, then definitely July.
Sometime coming this summer will be.
And if that doesn't happen, yeah.
Where is Farto? And you can, and again, going back to what we talked about earlier, our sponsor for today, the Eyewitness Crime Tour, Kim and them, they explore this whole story. So be sure to check that out, FunInKeyWest.com/crime.tour. But the next one I think that's really kind of interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know the story behind this, but the Beatles in Key West.
Yeah.
The Beatles were actually in Key West for what, 48 hours?
Yeah, they were here for a couple nights. And yeah, they were doing their tour, and this is 1964. Beatlemania was just taking over America. And a lot of people don't realize that on that tour, there were death threats against them. They went through a lot of stuff. And then as they were leaving Canada, they were going to be playing in Jacksonville, and there was a hurricane coming in. So the hurricane diverted them, and they were looking for a good place to go to wait it out. And Larry Kane, who had been a Miami news guy, he was traveling as a press agent with them. And he said, you might want to go down to Key West. I've got some friends down there. I can make a call. So they diverted to Key West, and they didn't do a concert here, not a standard concert. They stayed at the Key Wester Resort right next to the airport. And they played a little gig, and some of the members played a gig in the bar there. But their time here, some of it's been documented, but so much of it wasn't. So I sought out people who were here at the time, and I interviewed a dozen people who had close encounters with the Beatles when they were here. I mean, people who were in the hotel rooms with them, people who shot pool with them. There's just some incredible stories. Mm-hmm. And I think for people who never knew about the Beatles trip here, it's going to be like, oh, wow. Because I think Key West had more of an impact on the Beatles than the Beatles had in Key West. Wow. Things in Jacksonville, the stadium there was still segregated. Mm. And so they were holding up in Key West, and they told the city of Jacksonville, they said, oh, segregated. I guess we're not going to do the show.
Wow.
And Jacksonville's looking, saying, oh, geez, what are we going to do? We're going to have a riot on our hands if the Beatles don't play. Mm-hmm. And so they ended up giving in, and they did not segregate the auditorium or the stadium. And that was one of the first times that happened in Florida. So, and it made that impact where Paul ended up writing Blackbird, which was inspired in part by that. But he had another song he wrote later about John Lennon. Mm-hmm. And one of the lines in it is, what about the night we cried? And he talks about how that was in Key West. Right. And they were both coming to terms with the deaths of their mothers, all this fame that hit them. I mean, because they were basically kids. Yeah. And so they stayed up drinking heavily in their underwear in the room in the Key Wester Resort, and they just let it all out, and they both broke down crying. And that could be argued as one of the major turning points between McCartney and Lennon. Wow. And they had just met Bob Dylan the week before. They say he had introduced him to pot. And Bob Dylan wanted to be like the Beatles. He wanted all these fangirls coming after him. And the Beatles wanted to be like Bob Dylan because he had that smart style of writing and he was so different than them. So they both influenced each other. And you think, so they've got the week after that and they're in Key West with all this stuff going on. So it was really this confluence of so much energy. And that's the magic of Key West.
Oh, I agree. If Key West had a Beatles song, what would it be?
That's a good one. I'm going to have to think on that.
I'll come back to you on that one. So if you all have any questions as we're moving through this conversation, feel free to dump them in the chat and we'll address those. But of course, I can't have you on a show and not talk about Haunted Key West. There's just something about, the haunted side of Key West. You spent so much time researching all of the stories and documenting them. What keeps you going back to those stories?
New information.
Okay.
Because when I started in 1996, nobody was talking about ghosts in Key West. I spent 2 weeks here trying to dig up ghost stories and I could find nothing. I was about to leave town, and that's when Tom Hambright at the library, it changed my world. I'd been to the library looking for books. There was nothing. He wasn't there though. So when I saw him and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for a book on ghosts of Key West," he said, "Oh, there are none." And I almost left. And I have no idea where I'd have been if this hadn't happened. And Tom said, "Hang on, no books, but we've got ghosts." And he goes into the walk-in vault where we keep all the history, protected from hurricanes. And he emerges with this folder, about that thick, full of newspaper clippings from the past 30 years and all of the haunted history. So I started marking things on maps and I knocked on doors and I talked to people and I started writing down the stories.
Wow.
So much of what was happening then was word of mouth. People were just sharing the stories they knew. Now it's so much easier to research things. More and more documents are on the online archives.
Right.
So you're finding more and more people are coming forward. Back in 96, people thought you were crazy if you talked about a ghost.
Right.
Because there weren't all the TV shows. There were hardly any ghost tours in the United States. I think I was one of the first 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's changed. And now I like going back because Robert the Doll wasn't on display.
Right.
I got them to put them on display by telling everybody on my ghost tour, call the museum, ask them to put Robert the Doll on display. Nobody knew Robert's origins.
Right.
So much of him was a mystery. And I was able to find out that he was a Steiff doll made in Germany. I was able to find this treasure trove about the Otto family that allowed me to reverse engineer all of the legends and find out the source and the truth.
Right.
And now with Elena Hoyos, I believe that she may be buried with von Kassel in Zephyr Hills. And I have pretty good evidence that he murdered her.
Wow.
So these stories, they continue to evolve. Captain Tony used to tell me, he's like, "Yep, that's the hanging tree." Captain Tony would come out and tell stories to my ghost tour group when I first started. And I was just so blown away that he would take the time to do that, because he was a legend.
Right.
But he'd talk about the graves. He'd talk about the different things. Well, the grave of Elvira in Captain Tony's, I found out that was just from a farmhouse cemetery in New York. And it was probably a damaged grave because Elvira still has a grave up there. But so you find out what the truth is about different things. And I always like the truth. I love a good story. I think stories are such an important part of the Key West culture.
Yep.
And I like the way they evolve. And I think whenever we can find something that reshapes them and puts them back on track, it's always a good thing.
I agree. Well, you mentioned Robert the Doll. So let's talk about him. First, what do you think people get wrong about Robert the Doll?
That he's evil.
Okay.
So when I first started looking into Robert, he was the enchanted doll.
Oh.
Humans have made him evil.
Okay.
People made up rules. You better ask him for a photograph, or else he's going to curse you. Nonsense. It's nonsense. So, people say he's the inspiration for Chucky. It's a flat out lie.
Right.
But these are the things that stick with people. And hey, they like a good story. so that's what they're going to repeat. So those things stick. But now what I find more and more, people say, "Oh, I'm not going up there. That doll's evil." And he's not. He's not. He's magic.
Yeah.
He's magic. And it's interesting because one of the more recent things that I discovered, and I've spent 30 years trying to understand what makes Robert tick. And we discovered that there's an elemental spirit within him. And somebody else told me about this. And that's a whole nother story in itself. But I had heard about elementals, but I didn't know a lot about them.
Mhm.
So I started looking into them. And they're basically spirits that are attached to earth, wind, water, and fire.
Okay.
So an earth elemental would be part of a tree. They were first written about by Paracelsus, and he wrote about them in the Black Forest of Germany.
Okay.
That's where all of Grimm's fairy tales take place.
Right. Right.
So I'm thinking, wait a minute. Robert the doll is stuffed with excelsior, which is like a tightly spun wood wool. So I did some digging into where the Steiff company sourced their excelsior. And during that time, it would have been the Black Forest of Germany.
Oh, that's so cool.
So I believe that there's magic infused in Robert. And I think when people encounter him, it's almost like he'll take your hand and he'll take you into the forest. And it's not going to be pleasant all the time, but when you come out the other side, you're going to be a better person. And I think if people are looking for bad stuff, that's what they're going to get. And if people are looking for good stuff, that's what they're going to get. But that's the main thing. People think that he's evil. There's multiple entities in there. There's a little girl spirit. There's a lot of stuff going on. And so like the evil, the demon, all that stuff that irritates me.
I get it. And I think people really need to step back and, hear the stories, understand that everything evolves. And just because you take one of the ghost tours doesn't necessarily mean you have taken it and you don't take it again. The stories evolve, you see different things, the crowd is different, all of that.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. One of the things that we do, because there are about a dozen ghost tours in town.
Mhm.
We do the one that actually takes place inside Fortis Martello, where people get to investigate Robert the doll and meet him. And there's a lot of confusion because there was a time when the trolleys used to go up and stop. People would see Robert. And people who did that then keep saying, "Oh yeah, go on the trolley. They'll take you to see Robert." And it's not. The trolley's cool, but we're two different animals. And we're the only Ghost Key West, or Sloan's Ghost Tours is my company. But yeah, we will introduce you to Robert. We'll tell you the real story, and then let you spend time with him. We've got all that cool equipment too.
That is awesome. So as we start to wrap up, I have a few questions left here. What story do you still want to chase?
There's a few of them. The Elena Hoyos story.
Mhm.
I'd really love to be able to devote some time to that.
Okay.
That one's close to my heart, and I think she deserves justice because she's, it's painted as a love story a lot of times, and it's really not. It's a predator who assaulted and murdered a local girl,
Right.
and and he's been able to tell his story. No one's been around to tell hers, and I'd like to make her story known.
That's awesome. So I always ask people who spend time in Key West a few questions because our community always wants to know, where do people go? So quick answers here. Favorite happy hour?
I like the Green Parrot. Green Parrot's always my favorite bar.
It's one of mine.
It's always happy hour there for me.
Yeah, I like the Green Parrot. Favorite place for coffee, and what do you order?
I like to go to El Mocho
Mm.
on Stock Island,
Hmm.
and I usually get a con leche with no sugar. Now, I volunteer at the Key West Firehouse Museum,
Hmm.
which is an incredible place, and Sandy's is right near there. So any days that I'm volunteering, I'll call up Sandy's and swing by and you know go to the inside window and bypass the line and and grab that. So, but there's so many great coffee places.
Yeah, and they're similar, but they're different. It just depends on what you're
Yeah,
looking for. And
yeah,
so,
yeah. Five Brothers. If I'm ever in that neighborhood, oh God,
yeah,
love Five Brothers.
and their
Yeah.
sandwiches are amazing.
Hmm.
Um, Favorite place for breakfast, and what do you order?
I go to El Mocho again,
There you go.
and usually I'll get scrambled eggs and grits.
Ooh. Cheese on your grits?
No cheese on my grits.
Okay.
They
Okay.
put plenty of butter in there, and they've got a really good hot sauce.
Ooh.
So I like taking it and just putting that hot sauce over the eggs and over the grits, and to me that's just amazing. And then when I'm doing the artisan markets,
Mm-hmm.
La Grignot has a setup there. Oh my God, their croissants.
I know that. I
I
crave their croissants.
everything. I mean, they bake everything themselves,
Hmm.
and so that that's my weakness. And I tend to have, depending on what part of town I'm in, I'll
Hmm.
have my favorite place in that part of town. I
Right.
went to Banana Cafe for the
Ooh.
first time last week. No, not for the first time ever, but for the first time in a while.
Right.
And that used to be my standard. I'd go there a couple times a
Hmm.
week. So I went back and I had one of the crepes again. It was just as good as I remembered.
Yeah, they are amazing crepes. If you're going out for dinner, any place that you particularly like for dinner?
Yeah, only wood.
I love Onlywood.
Yeah, yeah, that's my wife and I. That's our favorite place. So, um, yeah, Onlywood is great, and we live on Stock Island.
Mhm.
So when we're here, we're going to hogfish a lot,
Oh,
and the docks is great, and also Rustica.
oh yeah, I love Rustic over there.
Yeah,
They have top-notch food over there.
yeah, everything Bobby does is just incredible. He does an incredible job.
Yeah. So thank you so much, David, for joining me today. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I really appreciate you having me on. If people want to come see me, I volunteer at the Firehouse Museum every Friday,
Okay.
and it's free. The admission is free all summer long, and it's one of the coolest places in town. We also do paranormal investigations there. So,
That's cool.
but that's where I am. Like every Friday, if somebody wants to get a book signed or just come say hello or anything like that, that's the place where I
And
am.
other than Fridays at the Firehouse, where else can people find your books, tours, and anything else upcoming about you?
So FunInKeyWest.com, I do signed copies. So if somebody isn't in Key West and they want to get an autographed copy mailed to them, FunInKeyWest.com. Amazon has them too. If people are in Key West, I like supporting the local bookstores. Sue's is incredible. Go by there. If a copy she has isn't signed, I'm in there seeing her regularly, and she's happy to take a note and have it signed. And she'll ship to people too.
Yes.
Um, and then like Concord Public Seafood Factory has my books. The airport has the books.
Right.
There's a lot of different places, a lot of the hotels. So
Yeah. And if you are over at Island Bookstore, be sure to check out the Fun and Key West Book Club End. We have a whole end devoted to all the books that we have read, and yours is there as well, since it is the May book. Again, thank you so much. This is the kind of conversation we like to have because it really highlights what makes Key West Key West. It's not Duval Street. It's more than that. It's more than the bars. It's more than the food scene. It's more than going out on the water. It's the stories that keep connecting people back to Key West. It's one of these places that I keep telling people you would be amazed at how many places intersect into Key West that you didn't even realize, and all the history, all of that. So thank you so much for
yeah,
joining us.
well, I appreciate everything that you're doing to keep these stories alive, and your passion for Key West is incredible. So thank you for giving me a platform to share my stories.
Well, thank you. And before we go, let me make sure we have that up there one more time. Before we go, I want to remind everybody that this episode was brought to you by Eyewitness Crime Tours. And honestly, there couldn't be a better fit for this conversation. Come explore the interesting stories of the darker side of Key West. Be sure to check that out, FunInKeyWest.com/crime-tour. So thank you again. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of the Fun in Key West community. And as always, you can head over to FunInKeyWest.com. There is so much information over there. We have the self-guided historic marker tour, so be sure to check those out so you get to learn a little bit more about these stories. And of course, there are links to all of the ghost tours and everything that you can explore with Mr. Sloan. You guys have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you later. Bye. A big thank you to David Sloan for joining us. This was such a fun reminder that what makes Key West special isn't just the sunsets and cocktails. It's the stories, the history, the mystery, and all of the unforgettable characters layered into this little island. And of course, this episode was brought to you by Eyewitness Crime Tours. If today's conversation made you want to dig deeper into the darker side of Key West history, that tour is absolutely worth adding to your list. You can check it out over at FunInKeyWest.com/crime-tour. Thanks so much for listening and being part of the Fun in Key West community. For more stories, guides, and all kinds of island goodness, head over to, you guessed it, FunInKeyWest.com. Until next time, have a great day, and we'll talk soon.